The planet Talara was once a world of peace, filled with bright skies and gentle oceans. The alien race living there, known as the Talarans, were kind and creative beings who loved harmony. Their cities floated above rivers of silver light powered by clean energy. The people of Talara believed the galaxy had forgotten war long ago. They did not build weapons and their military ships were few, more for exploration than for battle. Children played under golden suns and laughter echoed in the wind. But one night everything changed. It started as a whisper from the outer colonies, reports of strange lights near the edge of the system. The government thought it was a meteor shower or passing debris, but within hours the signals turned into screams. The Krath Dominion had arrived. They were a ruthless species that traveled from system to system, taking what they wanted and destroying everything else. Their ships were enormous, dark, and filled with energy cannons that could burn cities in seconds. The first explosions came before dawn. Huge fireballs fell from the sky, striking the surface like thunder. The Talarans had never seen such power. Entire communication towers melted into liquid metal. Families ran through the streets as the Krath warships descended, their engines roaring like monsters. The once peaceful capital of Talara became a field of chaos and smoke. Varen, a young scientist who worked at the planetary observatory, watched helplessly as the sky turned red. He had studied stars and comets his entire life, never imagining that one day fire would fall from the heavens to destroy his home. His parents shouted for him to get into the shelter, but he stayed by the communication console trying to reach the planetary defense center. There was only static. When the main defense system failed, the council ordered evacuation, but it was already too late. The Krath soldiers landed on the ground, metallic giants with glowing armor. They didn't speak or negotiate, they captured and killed anyone who resisted. The sound of plasma rifles filled the air. Varen could see the flames rising from the distance. His heart pounded, but he refused to run. He had one last hope, a project he had been working on secretly for years. Long ago, his ancestors had discovered a deep space communication device hidden in the ruins of an ancient outpost. It was said to be powerful enough to send signals across galaxies, even through war zones, but no one had ever used it, fearing what kind of attention it might bring. Varen remembered the legends, stories of a species that lived far away on a planet of storms and fire. The Deathworlders, no one truly knew who they were. Some said they were myths, others said they were monsters who survived on the deadliest planet in existence. But one thing was clear. Where they walked, no enemy dared to follow. As the walls shook and the city burned, Varen ran to the lower levels of the observatory. His hands trembled as he entered the access code to the old chamber. The door hissed open, revealing the ancient beacon, a large crystal sphere surrounded by black metallic coils. Dust and cobwebs covered it. He began working fast, connecting wires, restoring power, and adjusting frequencies. The room shook with every explosion outside. Sweat ran down his forehead. He could hear the faint cries of people dying above, but he kept going. His fingers moved quickly, almost automatically, guided by desperation. "Please," he whispered. "Someone hear us." Finally, the machine roared to life. A beam of blue energy shot into the sky, disappearing beyond the clouds. Varen spoke into the microphone, his voice shaking. "This is Talara. We are under attack by the Krath Dominion. We are peaceful people. Please, if anyone can hear us. We need help. They're killing everyone." For a few seconds, nothing happened. The only sound was the hum of the machine and the distant rumble of war. Then, as the signal stabilized, he added the last words that came from the bottom of his heart. "Please, we don't want to die." Outside, the ground split open as enemy tanks rolled through the streets. Varen shut down the power, knowing the signal was sent. He turned to leave but stopped when he heard the sound of boots. A Krath soldier entered the chamber, towering over him, its eyes glowing like molten lava. It raised its weapon. Varen froze, closing his eyes. The blast never came. Instead, the soldier looked up for a moment as if listening to something distant. Then it turned and left. Varen didn't understand why. Maybe his signal had interfered with their systems. Maybe something far greater had already begun to move. Hundreds of light years away, deep in the territory of the Deathworlders, a transmission alarm echoed inside a dark command ship. The crew, humans trained for survival in the harshest conditions, looked up at their captain. Captain Lyra Kale stood silent for a long moment, staring at the flickering hologram that showed a broken world and a terrified alien face. Her eyes hardened. "Origin?" she asked. Unknown, the officer replied. But the signal was encrypted with an ancient pattern. Looks like pre-war tech. Coordinates locked, Lyra's jaw tightened. Patch the message again. The room filled with static, and then the voice of Varen came through, weak and trembling. We are peaceful people. Please, help us. Silence followed. The crew members exchanged uneasy glances. Deathworlders were not known for mercy. They had seen too much death, too much betrayal. But something in that voice, something raw, cut through their steel hearts. Captain, said one of the younger officers softly. It's a trap, maybe. Maybe, Lyra answered. Or maybe it's a call we can't ignore. The room grew quiet again. Then she spoke clearly, her voice cold and sharp. Prepare the fleet. Plot a course to those coordinates. Full armament. Her crew saluted immediately. There was no hesitation. When the Deathworlders moved, the universe paid attention. Engines roared across the fleet as ships powered up. Massive destroyers, sleek frigates, and heavy carriers, all dark and scarred from previous wars, came alive. The humans aboard them moved with a calm readiness that came only from experience. They didn't fight for glory. They fought because they had to. The moment the coordinates were locked, the fleet entered hyperspace. Blue light filled the stars as space folded around them. The hum of the engine sounded like a heartbeat, steady, unstoppable. Back on Talara, Varen crouched under the collapsed ceiling of the observatory, holding his injured arm. He could hear the Krath patrols moving outside, their metallic voices echoing through the ruins. His eyes burned from smoke, his body weak, but in his heart, a spark of hope refused to die. He looked up at the dark sky, whispering to himself. Please, let someone come. In the cold vacuum of deep space, thousands of human ships raced toward his world. Their weapons gleamed and their engines flared with power. The Deathworlders were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to end the war. As the stars streaked past, Captain Lyra Kale stood at the front of the bridge, her reflection shining in the glass. She thought of her own planet, the storms, the beasts, the endless struggle for survival. Humanity had been called Deathworlders for a reason. They didn't live in peace. They learned to fight for it. Now someone else had called for their help, and for the first time in years she felt something stir in her chest, a cold fire. Whoever did this, she whispered, will wish they hadn't. Behind her, the crew nodded silently. The Deathworlders were on their way, and when they arrived, the galaxy would remember their name. For the first time since the invasion began, hope returned to the dying planet of Talara. The skies still burned, but far beyond the stars, salvation, terrifying and unstoppable, was coming. The alien world of Zephora had never known fear until the sky itself began to burn. For generations, its people had lived in harmony, their silver cities reflecting the light of two suns. Their kind was peaceful, gentle, and deeply proud of their intelligence. They believed that the galaxy was a place of cooperation, not conflict. That belief shattered the moment the Kreth swarm arrived, a race of brutal, insectoid conquerors known for leaving nothing alive in their path. The Zypherans tried everything. They sent envoys, offered negotiations, even begged for peace. But the Kreth didn't understand peace. They only understood dominance. Their ships darkened the skies, their plasma beams cutting through towers that had stood for centuries. Families ran through the streets in panic, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The smell of smoke and fear filled the air. Every broadcast channel screamed with distress calls, but none brought an answer. The proud Zypherans were falling, and fast. Then one desperate scientist named Aelin made a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy. He remembered the stories whispered across the stars, stories about a world so dangerous that even the Kreth avoided it. A world whose inhabitants were known not for diplomacy or kindness, but for their unmatched ability to survive. They were called Deathworlders, humans, from a planet known as Earth, a place where everything that breathed could kill, and yet humanity thrived. No Zypheran had ever dared to contact them before. The stories were too terrifying. It was said that humans were emotional creatures, capable of love but also capable of unimaginable rage. Still, with his world burning, Aelin sent the call. It was a desperate signal, a plea for help sent through the void of space. The message was simple. We are dying. please. If you can hear us, help us. Days passed. The Kreeth continued their slaughter. Cities crumbled one after another. Aelin sat in the ruins of the central command center, surrounded by broken machinery and the quiet sobs of survivors. His hope had almost faded when suddenly, the transmission screen flickered. A voice came through, calm, deep, and human. "This is the Terran Fleet Command. Message received. Hold your ground. Help is coming." Alin's heart pounded. He didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. The humans were coming. The Deathworlders. For the first time in days, the Zypherans dared to hope. Across the planet, the message spread like fire. People lifted their eyes to the stars, whispering prayers to beings they had once feared. But no one truly knew what it meant for the humans to answer. Far across the galaxy, the call to arms echoed through human space. The message from Zephora reached the Terran High Council, and within hours orders were issued. Humanity had evolved since first venturing into the stars. They had seen wars, built alliances, and forged a reputation as the galaxy's most unpredictable species. When humans fought, they fought with their entire soul, not for power, but for survival, justice, and vengeance. Fleet Admiral Marcus Voss stood at the center of the Terran command hall, his expression cold and focused. "They asked for aid," he said to his officers. "But what they're going to get is retribution." The room fell silent. Around him, holomaps of Zephora lit up, showing the Kreeth swarms spread. "Those creatures think they can prey on the weak," he continued. "They've forgotten what fear feels like. We're going to remind them." Within days, the might of the Deathworlders assembled. The Terran fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships designed in the crucible of constant danger. Their hulls were built from alloys forged in the pressure of Earth's deadliest volcanoes. Their engines roared with the fury of storms, and their soldiers, the humans, carried in their eyes the same defiance that had once let them tame a planet that tried to kill them daily. As the fleet prepared to depart, families on Earth gathered to watch the broadcast. They saw the long silver ships rising from the launch bays, breaking through clouds and into the darkness of space. Some cheered, some prayed. Others simply whispered, "May God have mercy on whoever stands against them." Meanwhile, on Zephora, the situation worsened. The Kreeth had begun their final assault on the capital city. Thousands of Zephyrans fled underground, hiding in tunnels and caves, as the skies burned red. The once beautiful planet had become a wasteland of ash and ruin. Aelin watched helplessly, as the Kreeth tore apart what was left of their defense lines. He closed his eyes, thinking the end had come. Then, without warning, the air began to tremble. The Kreeth ships above paused, their radar systems going haywire. A blinding light split the clouds, and out of the void emerged the Terran fleet. Ship after ship appeared, hundreds of them, dark and massive against the firelit sky. The Zypherans stared upward in disbelief. Their cries of despair turned into gasps of awe. The Deathworlders had arrived. Aelin rushed to the communication console. "This is Zephora Command. You came," he shouted. The human voice answered again, steady and fearless. "We said we would." In orbit, Admiral Voss gave the final command. "Engage." The first wave of human ships unleashed a storm of light. Missiles streaked through the sky, plasma beams cutting through Kreeth ships like knives through paper. The battlefield erupted in chaos. The Kreeth tried to fight back, but the Deathworlders moved with terrifying precision. Their targeting systems adapted faster, their weapons hit harder, and their will to fight was unbreakable. From the surface, Zypherans watched as the predators who had once hunted them were torn apart by something far greater. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose, as if every scream from Zephora had become their own pain. But even as the Kreeth fleet began to crumble, the humans didn't slow down. They showed no mercy. The battle wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about retribution. The Deathworlders fought to make sure no species would ever again think of preying on the weak. Down below, Aelin felt the ground shake as wreckage from the Kreeth ships rained down like falling stars. The Zypherans cheered, tears streaming down their faces. For the first time in their history, they witnessed war not as victims, but as survivors protected by the most feared species in the galaxy. The night that had begun in fire was ending in light. Humanity had arrived, not as saviors, but as the galaxy's reckoning. The Deathworlders had answered the call for help, and their response was written in flame. The battle for Zephora had begun in the skies, but its echoes reached deep into the hearts of every living soul on the planet. The once silent world was now filled with thunder. Fire rained down, explosions lit the night, and the air trembled with the force of war. For the Zypherans, it was both terrifying and mesmerizing. They had never seen such power before, not in stories, not in dreams. The Deathworlders were unlike anything they had imagined. They fought not just to win, but to destroy the very idea of defeat. Alen watched the sky from the shattered command center. The Kreth fleet that had once looked unstoppable now broke apart like glass under human fire. Massive human warships moved with impossible precision, their plasma cannons slicing through the enemy ranks. A single shot from a Terran destroyer could vaporize an entire Kreth vessel. But it wasn't only the technology that made humans deadly, it was their fury. Every maneuver, every blast carried purpose. It was as if the humans were fighting not just for Zephora, but for something personal, something deeply rooted in their nature. Down in the cities, the Zephorans emerged from hiding. They stood in the streets, staring at the glowing trails of missiles streaking across the sky. For the first time, their fear began to fade. A young Zephoran girl tugged at her mother's arm and whispered, "Are those the Deathworlders?" Her mother nodded slowly, eyes wet with relief. "Yes, child. Those are the ones who heard our cry." But even as the humans fought above, the Kreth were not finished. Their swarm was vast. Millions of ships spread across the orbit and ground. The main fleet had fallen into chaos, but on the surface, their warriors continued to spread destruction. Enormous insectoid soldiers, armored in black chitin, crawled through the ruins. They dragged Zepherans from hiding, killing any they found. Alen knew the fight wasn't over. He activated the emergency beacon again, sending coordinates to the human fleet. "This is Alen of Zephora Command. The enemy is still on the surface." "We need help down here," the reply came instantly. "Hold position. Ground teams inbound." Moments later, the sound of thunder grew louder, but it wasn't the Kreth this time. Giant Terran dropships broke through the clouds, their engines roaring like beasts. They descended through fire and smoke, landing with earth-shaking force. The Zepherans watched in awe as the hatches opened and humans stepped out, tall, armored, and radiating an aura of sheer dominance. They moved in perfect formation, their suits glinting with blue light, carrying weapons that hummed with power. One of them, a female soldier named Commander Arya Kane, led the charge. Her eyes scanned the ruins, calculating, fearless. She raised her weapon and shouted a single word, "Advance!" What followed was something the Zepherans would never forget. The human soldiers stormed through the city like a wave of retribution. They didn't hesitate. Every Kreth warrior that crossed their path was destroyed. Their movements were fast, brutal, and precise. The ground shook under their boots and the air burned with the sound of their rifles. Alen ran to meet them. He stood in the middle of the street, trembling as Commander Kane approached. Her armor was covered in ash, her expression calm but cold. "You're the one who sent the call?" she asked. Alen nodded. "Yes, you came for us. We don't leave our allies behind," she replied simply. "Now tell me where the civilians are." Alen led them through the ruins, showing where Zephyran families were hiding. The humans moved quickly, setting up defense lines and helping evacuate survivors. One soldier knelt beside a frightened Zephyran child, offering her a small ration bar. "You're safe now," he said softly. The girl looked at his strange human face and whispered, "Thank you." It was a moment of quiet humanity in the middle of chaos, but peace didn't last long. The Kreth were regrouping. From the east, a massive shadow began to rise, the Kreth mothership descending through the atmosphere. It was enormous, larger than a city, its surface crawling with energy. The humans looked up, and even they were momentarily silent. "That's their command ship," said Commander Kane. "If it lands, the planet's done." In orbit, Admiral Voss received the same signal. He stood before the tactical display, watching the readings spike. "They're bringing their queen ship into atmosphere," his officer reported. Voss clenched his fist. "Then we take it out. Prepare the Vanguard cannons." The order spread through the fleet. Massive cannons unfolded from the largest human battleships, glowing bright with charged plasma. The Kreth mothership fired first. A beam of red energy that cut through the sky, striking one of the Terran ships. The explosion lit up the heavens, and for a brief moment the Zephorans feared the humans might fall. But they didn't. The Deathworlders fought harder. Every human ship turned its guns toward the enemy. "Fire!" Voss commanded. The Vanguard cannons released their fury, beams of white light that pierced the darkness. The impact was like the wrath of gods. The Kreth mothership's hull began to melt, its armor tearing apart. Explosions rippled through it like fire spreading through dry leaves. On the surface, Aelin and the humans watched the sky ignite. The Kreth mothership roared as it began to fall, its massive body breaking apart in the atmosphere. Debris rained down, but the humans shielded the Zephorans with energy barriers. The ground shook violently as the colossal wreck finally hit the ocean beyond the city, sending up a wave that could be seen from miles away. The cheers that followed echoed across Zephora. For the first time, the Kreth, the hunters of countless worlds, were defeated. The Deathworlders had done what no one else had ever dared to do. They didn't just defend. They erased the threat completely. Commander Kane removed her helmet, her hair sticking to her face from sweat and smoke. She looked at Aelin and gave a small, tired smile. "It's over," she said. But Aelin shook his head. "No, it's not. You saved us, but you lost men. You fought for a world that wasn't yours. Why?" Kane glanced at the distant horizon, where the sun was rising through the smoke. "Because once someone fought for us too, and because no one, should live in fear of monsters." Her words stayed with him long after the battle ended. The Zephyrans began to rebuild, guided and protected by the Deathworlders. The humans helped restore power, provided food, and treated the wounded. They didn't ask for anything in return. They simply worked, quietly, efficiently, like people who had seen too much of war but still believed in doing what was right. That night, as the stars returned to the sky, Aelin sat beside the ruins of the command center, looking up at the human ships glowing above the clouds. He thought of what they represented, not just power but balance. The galaxy had always feared the Deathworlders, but now he understood the truth. They were not demons. They were protectors. Dangerous, yes, but only to those who brought harm. Far above, Admiral Voss sent one final transmission to Commander Kane. "The Kreth swarm is broken. Prepare for withdrawal. Zephora is safe," she acknowledged with a salute. "Understood, Admiral." Before leaving, she turned back to Aelin one last time. "If your people ever need us again," she said, "you know how to reach us." And then, like ghosts of fire, the Deathworlder fleet rose back into the heavens. Their engines thundered, and in moments, they were gone, leaving behind silence, hope, and a story that would echo for generations. That day, the Zephyrans learned something no history book could ever teach, that mercy and wrath could exist in the same heart, and that the most feared species in the galaxy had become their greatest allies. The Deathworlders had come not just to fight, but to show what true strength meant. The battle was over, but Zephora was a world forever changed. The once shining cities were reduced to ruins, their glass towers shattered and blackened by fire. The air smelled of smoke and metal, and the ground was littered with the remnants of a war no Zephoran could have imagined. Yet among all the destruction, there was life again. People were stepping out from the underground tunnels, blinking into the dim light of dawn. For the first time in weeks, there was no sound of weapons, no screams, no terror, only the wind blowing softly through the empty streets. Aelin stood on the high platform that had once been the heart of the Central Command. Around him were human soldiers moving carefully through the wreckage, checking for survivors and marking safe zones. Their armor was scratched and scorched, their faces tired but calm. They had seen this kind of aftermath before, too many times on too many worlds. To them, rebuilding was as much a part of war as fighting. Commander Arya Kane walked up beside Aelin. Her armor was removed now, replaced by a dark gray uniform. A faint scar ran across her cheek, a mark from the last fight against the Kreth. She looked at the horizon, where the remains of the Kreth mothership still smoldered in the ocean, a black mountain of twisted metal. "You've got a lot of work ahead," she said quietly. Aelin nodded slowly. "Yes, but we're alive because of you." Kane smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You're alive because your people didn't give up. You sent that signal. That took courage. He looked at her with deep respect. You call it courage. I call it desperation. We had no hope left. Sometimes, she said, hope begins in desperation. Her words carried a quiet strength, something that stayed in his heart. In the days that followed, the humans didn't leave immediately. Instead, they stayed to help rebuild. Massive Terran transports brought supplies, machines, and medical equipment. Human engineers worked alongside Zephyran scientists, showing them how to purify water, rebuild energy grids, and repair communication towers. For a peaceful race like the Zephyrans, it was overwhelming to see how fast humans worked. Their resilience was something almost supernatural. One day, Alan walked through the ruins of the science district. Where there had once been shining laboratories, there were now temporary camps filled with both Zephyrans and humans. He saw human doctors treating Zephyran children, giving them food and medicine. Soldiers who had fought fierce battles were now playing with the little ones, building small toys out of spare machine parts. It was a strange, heartwarming sight. The same hands that had destroyed an army were now gentle and kind. But beneath this peace, a new tension was growing. The human fleet had destroyed the Kreth swarm near Zyphera, but deep in space, the rest of the swarm was still alive. Scouts had reported that more Kreth fleets were regrouping at the edge of the sector. The war wasn't truly over. Admiral Voss knew it. Commander Kane knew it too. Inside the Terran command ship Resolute, the air was heavy with strategy meetings and discussions. Admiral Marcus Voss stood before a holographic display showing multiple red dots, Kreth signals. They're rebuilding faster than we expected, said one of his officers. If they regroup, Zephora will be their first target again. Voss's jaw tightened. Then we won't wait for them to come. We'll take the fight to them. Meanwhile, on the planet, Alan was unaware of the scale of the threat. To him, the sight of human ships in the sky still meant safety. He spent his days helping his people recover data from damaged archives and assisting the humans with translation between their systems. During those moments, he often talked with Commander Kane. She was unlike any being he had ever met. Strong, sharp-minded, but with a quiet sadness in her eyes. One evening, they stood near the ruins of Zephora's main observation dome. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold, reflecting off the shattered glass. Your people, Alan said softly. You fight so fiercely, but there's pain behind your strength. I can feel it. Kane didn't answer at first. She stared at the distant horizon, her expression unreadable. You're right, she finally said. Humanity learned long ago that peace doesn't last unless you're willing to fight for it. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. Everything there, the weather, the animals, even the ground, was hostile. We had to become strong just to survive, and that strength never left us. Alan looked at her thoughtfully. So you became Deathworlders? Kane smiled faintly. Yes, but not because we wanted to be feared. We became that way because life forced us to. Survival is written into our bones. There was silence between them for a while. The wind blew softly through the broken dome. Maybe that's why the galaxy fears you, Alan said. You're unpredictable. No one understands how you can be so dangerous and yet so compassionate. She laughed quietly, a sound that was almost sad. That's humanity for you. We build, we destroy, we love, we grieve. We are chaos and order mixed together. That night, a sudden alarm broke through the calm. The humans detected an incoming signal, encrypted, faint, but recognizable. It was Kreth communication. The swarm was moving again. Panic spread across the command channels. Within minutes, Commander Kane was back in her armor, coordinating with Admiral Voss. The new Kreth fleet wasn't as large as the one destroyed, but it was faster and more aggressive. They were coming not to conquer, but to avenge. The Zephyrans, terrified, gathered in shelters again, though this time they were not hopeless. They had the Deathworlders with them. Admiral Voss's voice echoed through the fleet. This time we finish it. No mercy. Human ships formed a defensive ring around Zyphora. The night sky lit up once more as the first wave of Kreth ships appeared. The humans didn't wait. They launched the attack with the precision of a blade. The sky exploded into light as hundreds of plasma bursts and missile trails cut through the darkness. The Kreth tried to push through, but the Deathworlders' strategy was flawless. They adapted to every move, predicting enemy formations before they even formed. On the surface, Commander Kane led the planetary defense. No Kreth touches this ground again, she shouted through the comms. Human artillery thundered from the hills, targeting anything that descended. The Zephyrins watched from their shelters, their faith stronger than fear. They knew the Deathworlders would not lose. The Kreth fleet fought fiercely, but they were up against a species that had mastered war in a galaxy that once underestimated them. Within hours, the battle began to turn. Kreth ships exploded one by one, their commanders panicking as human drones swarmed through their defenses. The humans didn't stop until there was silence again. Deep, endless silence. When it was over, the stars above Zephora were clear once more. The Kreth were gone. Not just defeated, but erased from that sector of space. The Zephyrins stepped out from their shelters to see the sky filled not with fire, but with the gentle glow of the human ships, silent guardians above their world. Aelin met Commander Kane again on the same observation platform. Her armor was dented, her eyes tired, but there was peace in her expression. "It's done," she said. He looked up at the stars. "You saved us again. Twice now your people have stood between us and death. How do we ever repay that?"
Kane smiled softly.
"You don't. You survive. You rebuild. You remember." There was a long silence. Then Aelin asked, "Will you stay?" She shook her head slowly. "No. There are other worlds out there that might need us. But we'll be watching. Always." The next day, the human fleet began to prepare for departure. The Zephyrins gathered in the open fields to watch them leave. Children waved, holding small banners they had made with the symbol of the Terran fleet. Old and young alike whispered blessings, calling the humans the bringers of light. As the ships rose through the clouds, Alen felt a deep ache in his heart. He knew this was the end of something extraordinary. The Deathworlders had come into their lives like a storm, destructive, unstoppable, but life-giving in their own way. They had taught the Zephyrins what true strength looked like, not just the strength to fight, but the strength to stand up again after losing everything. The sky lit up one last time as the Terran fleet jumped into hyperspace, disappearing into the stars. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful. Zephora was free, and in that peace Aelin whispered to himself, "They were not monsters. They were our saviors." From that day on, the name Deathworlders no longer meant fear in the Zephyrin tongue. It meant hope, courage, and the promise that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, light could rise from the most unexpected place, from a world once called dangerous, and from a people who fought not for glory, but for justice. The war was finally over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound of explosions that had filled the galaxies for months. The Deathworlders had done what they came to do. They had answered the call for help, and in doing so, they had rewritten the fate of entire civilizations. The alien world that once cried out in desperation was now standing on the edge of a new dawn, watching the Deathworlder ships leave the orbit, their engines glowing like dying stars. Captain Rhea stood at the command deck of the flagship Vigilant Spear, her eyes fixed on the fading horizon of the alien planet below. She had seen too much, and destruction, chaos, and fear, but what haunted her most were the faces of those they came to save. Those faces were not just grateful, they were changed forever. The aliens, once weak and hopeless, had witnessed what true wrath looked like when humanity decided to fight back. The Deathworlders had come with fire, and in fire, they had given justice. Down on the surface, the survivors of the alien world were rebuilding their cities, but every wall they raised, every home they reconstructed, was a silent reminder of what it took to survive. The skies still carried the scars of battle, burnt clouds, wrecked ships drifting in orbit like ghosts of vengeance. Children played in the dust, but even their laughter carried a strange echo, as if the world itself remembered the screams that once filled it. Rhea couldn't forget either. When the alien distress signal first reached Earth, it was just another message among thousands that humans intercepted. But something about this one, the desperation in their tone, the hopelessness in their eyes, struck something deep inside the Deathworlders. They remembered their own past, their own history of suffering, and how no one had come for them when they were weak. So they came now, not just to help, but to make sure that no one ever dared to prey on the innocent again. The Retribution had been brutal. The invaders in the Zarketh Dominion were a race known for their cruelty. They had conquered planets for centuries, turning peaceful worlds into mines and their people into slaves. But this time, when they came for the small alien world of Lurith, they made one mistake. They hurt someone the Deathworlders chose to protect. Humanity didn't just respond, They unleashed everything. Entire fleets of Deathworlder ships descended upon the Zarketh forces, and what followed was not a battle. It was a storm. Now, with the war over, the Zarketh dominion was gone. Their worlds were in ruins, their ships nothing but drifting metal in the void. The universe had witnessed something it had never seen before. Humans fighting not for power, not for resources, but for justice. And that changed everything. The other alien species who once looked at Deathworlders with fear or suspicion now looked at them with awe, and a little fear still, but a fear mixed with deep respect. As Rhea watched the planet fade from view, she thought about what it meant to be a Deathworlder. It wasn't about being strong or violent. It was about surviving against all odds. It was about standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. Humanity had been tested countless times on their dangerous homeworld, through wars, disasters, and endless struggle, and every time they rose again, stronger. That was what made them who they were. That was why the universe called them Deathworlders. Not because they came from a deadly world, but because they carried the strength of survival in their blood. On the planet's surface, the alien leader, a frail but wise being named Tareen, stood near the memorial that was built for the fallen. It was a towering monument made of black stone, inscribed with the names of those who had died in the war, both alien and human. Tareen looked up at the sky, where the last Deathworlder ships vanished into the distance. His heart was full of gratitude and sorrow. He knew that their world would never be the same again. The Deathworlders had not just saved them, they had taught them something priceless: courage. Far away, in the quiet halls of the Galactic Council, word of the Deathworlder Retribution spread like wildfire. Some called it a warning, others called it a miracle. But everyone knew one thing for sure: the universe had changed. No longer would tyrants and empires think they could crush the weak without consequences. The name Deathworlder had become a symbol, a name that carried both fear and hope. As weeks passed, humanity withdrew from the war zones, leaving behind aid, engineers, and healers to help rebuild. Rhea often walked among the ruins, helping where she could, talking to the survivors, listening to their stories. Some aliens still trembled at her presence. They had seen the Deathworlders in battle, and the memory of that fury still frightened them. But when they saw her offering food to their children, fixing their broken shelters and speaking with warmth and kindness, they began to understand that humanity was not just power, it was compassion too. Back on Earth, the story of the alien rescue in the war became a legend. People spoke about it with pride, but also with humility. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder of their duty. Humanity had entered a new chapter, no longer just a species trying to survive in the galaxy, but a force that could shape the destiny of others. Rhea returned home months later, carrying the memories of war with her. She couldn't sleep for weeks. The faces of her crew, the cries of the wounded, and the fire in the skies haunted her dreams. But every time she looked at the small pendant around her neck, a gift from Tareen engraved with the words, "For those who bring light to the dark," she found peace again. She knew they had done the right thing. In the end, humanity didn't seek glory or control. They sought balance, a universe where no one would ever have to send a desperate cry for help and be ignored. The Deathworlders had delivered retribution, yes, but they had also delivered hope. They showed that even in a cold, vast galaxy, there were still beings who cared, who would fight not for themselves but for what was right. Years later, when the stars of Lurith were calm again, and the new generation of children grew under peaceful skies, the story of the Deathworlders became part of their songs and legends. They spoke of fierce warriors with fire in their hearts and mercy in their hands. They spoke of ships that came like storms but left behind peace, and somewhere, beyond the stars on a quiet planet called Earth, Captain Rhea stood under the night sky, looking at the same constellations those children now looked at. She smiled softly and whispered, "We heard your call." And we answered. The universe would never forget. The Deathworlders had written their story not with words but with courage, a story of how far compassion could reach when guided by strength. And though the war had ended, their message echoed through the stars forever. That true power lies not in destruction, but in the will to protect.